Every day, we live with evil. We witness the darkest parts of human behavior. The suffering caused by one individual to another is a latent aspect of our society. As criminal investigators, we delve into that dark side of humanity. We bring the most perverse crimes to the screen and attempt to understand the minds of those who commit the most terrible acts. Hello, welcome to the Crime Documentary Files channel. This is the case of Stephen Rios. Little is known about the early life of Stephen Arthur Rios, except that he was born in 1977. It can be inferred that he was born somewhere in the United States, as he spent his life in that country. From a young age, he aspired to be part of the police force, a goal he achieved by working for the police departments of Dixon and Waynesville in south-central Missouri, though the specific dates of his service are not provided. After those two experiences, he was hired by the Sheriff's Department of Vaughn County in June 1999. However, his stay in Vaughn was brief, and after a month, he resigned following some irregular events that called his performance into question. According to information from the public ministry, Stephen used another police officer's name to rent a storage unit. Not satisfied with just using a false identity, he also abused his position by storing objects in a neighboring unit without paying for it and even put a padlock on it. When a problem arose regarding the unpaid storage unit, the other officer, whose identity Stephen had usurped, was cited. As a consequence of these actions, Stephen was given the option to resign or be fired, and he chose to resign. However, this remained an internal matter, and no charges were filed against him. Later, he worked briefly as a security agent for Target in a well-known shopping center in Columbia. In October 1999, he was hired by the city as a security agent at the airport. Around 2001, Stephen applied to join the Columbia Police Department. Although they were aware of the previous incident in Vaughn, they decided to hire him because they considered the event insufficient to disqualify him. Additionally, before hiring him, they verified his criminal record and references and found nothing out of place. In parallel with his jobs in the security area, Stephen's personal life seemed to be going well. He dated Elizabeth Sullivan, a kind and beautiful young woman whom everyone called Libby. They got married and formed a happy home, where the two treated each other with affection. She was totally in love and trusted her husband, whom she considered a good man. Elizabeth's parents, John and Susan Sullivan, were friendly people with good hearts, and soon they accepted Stephen as one of the family. The happiness of both the couple and the in-laws was complete when Elizabeth announced her pregnancy, and it reached its peak when their firstborn, Grayson Rios, was born. Immediately, the baby became the center of the home for the Rios and the Sullivan grandparents. It could be said that everything was going well personally and professionally. The only detail that sometimes worried his wife was that his job always involved some risk. As a police officer, he often had to restore order when rioters disturbed the peace. Sometimes, these incidents became violent, but Stephen had been lucky enough to come out unscathed. It was precisely during one of these calls, when the officers went to break up a noisy party, that their paths crossed with a young man named Jesse Valencia. Jesse James Wade Valencia was born in Prairieville, Missouri, on February 22, 1981. For years, he was Linda V's only son and spent much of his childhood with his mother and grandparents on their rural Kentucky farm. Then Linda started a relationship with Lupe Valencia, a great man who became the real father figure for the little boy, and Jesse took his last name. Later on, the family grew, and the boy had two sisters whom he pampered a lot. The trust between Jesse and his mother was always a pillar of their relationship. That is why, in adolescence, Jesse spoke openly to Linda about his sexuality and told her that he was gay. He also told her that he had the feeling he would die very young, though he couldn't explain why. His mother was always loving and did not judge her son for his sexuality. In fact, she was always a great support for Jesse, even when he became an adult. As he grew up, he became an attractive and charismatic young man, so much so that he managed to work as a male model after high school. However, that phase did not last long because the young man moved to Columbia, Missouri, to attend college. He always showed interest in achieving his goals, and college was no exception. He met his academic requirements while working, and like every young person, also took time out of his busy schedule to have fun and go to parties with his friends. Almost without realizing it, between enjoying and studying, Jesse was already in the penultimate year at the University of Missouri, where he was studying law and journalism. His intention was to become a lawyer. By that time, he was also working at the motel campus, and in his free time, he enjoyed the nightlife of a young college student. He had many friends and presumably several occasional sexual partners, because he did not seem willing to settle down in a monogamous relationship. He was openly gay at his university, where he had the support of people who loved him. A forced relationship and a tragedy. His fate crossed with Stevens in April 2004. The police were called to interrupt a college party, where Jesse was one of the attendees and vehemently opposed the police action. The officer arrested him for disturbing public order, but on the way to the police station, Steven made a friendlier approach and asked Jesse a lot of personal questions. According to his friends, Jesse was tremendously surprised when the officer appeared at his door the next day and offered to erase his record for the disturbance at the party in exchange for sexual favors. From then on, they began an association that eventually turned into a sexual relationship, but the rules were set by Steven, who would arrive whenever he felt like it and without prior notice to the student's home. After their intimate encounters, the officer would leave. Apparently, there was no emotional bond, only attraction. And according to other sources, there was more coercion than attraction. According to Andy Chorn, one of Jesse's occasional partners, the officer appeared out of nowhere and imposed his will. Andy was present during one of these visits and said he was coerced into participating in sexual activities. Afterward, Steven made both Jesse and Andy swear to keep silent. The truth was that Jesse was growing tired of the situation. Since the night of the party, more than a month had passed, and Steven continued to appear at his will at Jesse's home. Jesse, who had always been open with his mother, told her that Jesse felt extorted and harassed. To make matters worse, he was almost certain that the officer had given him a false name, making it difficult to put an end to the situation. An unpleasant surprise ended up infuriating Jesse because he was summoned to court for the disturbances after the party. This proved that the charges were never withdrawn, nor was his record cleared as Steven had promised. He was really upset because he had endured the entire unacceptable situation with the police officer in vain. He was willing to report the officer to the police command and was discussing this with his friend Joan Sheridan. However, anger was not a constant state for Jesse, who was known for his festive spirit. On the night of June 4, 2004, he finished his shift at the motel and went to a party on campus, where he had fun and drank with his friends until dawn. He then returned home after receiving calls from one of his friends, Ed McDevitt. When the sun rose on the morning of June 5, 2004, the university campus was filled with the cheerful bustle of young people starting their day, but soon everything changed. Some students who left early for class saw a young man lying on the grass between two houses. He was only wearing underpants, and they thought he had probably passed out after drinking the night before. However, when they approached, they realized he was dead. The uproar caused by this discovery was tremendous, and the university community could not believe what had happened. Shortly after, it was revealed that the body was Jesse's. The authorities were notified, and the police arrived at the scene. The officers were shocked by the ferocity of the attack. First, Jesse's throat was squeezed to obstruct all airflow, and if that were not enough, a deep cut was made in his neck with a sharp, serrated instrument. According to the reviews, the body had bruises indicating that Jesse had fought for his life before being suffocated. However, he had no defensive injuries related to the attack with the bladed weapon, so they assumed it happened when he was already unconscious. It was not until the next day that the police arrived at the scene and began to investigate. Jesse's body was found lying on the grass between two houses, and it was confirmed that he had been drinking the night before. He was only wearing underpants, and they assumed he had probably passed out after drinking the previous night. They also found bruises on his neck, indicating he had fought for his life. The authorities asked for any clues about why or how the fatal attack had happened, and an unexpected suspect emerged during the investigation. Andy. He was one of the people interrogated and told the detectives that Jesse had some sort of romance, or at least a sexual relationship with a Columbia police officer. Andy reported that he had seen the officer once when the officer showed up unannounced at Jesse's apartment while they were having intimate relations and ended up joining them. The officer then made them swear to keep it a secret. Andy also made an important revelation by reporting that Jesse had later gotten angry with the officer and threatened to tell his story to the police department. Surprised by this new clue, the investigators asked if Andy knew the officer's name. Andy said the last name was Anderson, but when the two officers with the last name Anderson were investigated, they did not match the description given by Andy. Another significant element arose at that time because one of the agents declared that his nameplate had been stolen, indicating that someone was usurping his identity. Determined to find the suspect, they asked the witness to look at an album of photos of agents. Again, everyone was surprised when he told them it was unnecessary because he had just crossed paths with the officer in the corridor. It was then revealed that it was Stephen, who incidentally was one of the first agents to respond when Jesse's body was found. Investigating the records to verify if Andy's story was reliable, they found that indeed, in April 2004, Stephen had arrested Jesse for causing a disturbance while the officer was putting an end to a noisy party. Jesse's other friends, questioned by the police, corroborated the story that the officer asked him several personal questions while they were in the patrol car and then offered to delete the arrest record if Jesse had sexual relations with him. Linda, Jesse's mother, was also consulted by the investigators and reported that she initially believed her son was excited about the relationship, but that perception quickly changed because he felt harassed by the officer. Some friends of the deceased student confirmed the same version about the assault by the officer. However, Jesse's family and friends had different views on why he wanted to report the situation to his superiors. The first version indicated that after having multiple sexual encounters with the officer, Jesse got angry when the records were not deleted. The second was that Jesse found out the officer was married, and the lie offended him. In any case, regardless of the reason, the truth was that the university student was upset and was going to report the situation to higher authorities, which posed a risk for Stephen. With all that data collected, the detectives confronted Officer Stephen. He admitted to having arrested Jesse weeks before but tried at all costs to deny any link beyond the professional with the student. However, when he was informed that a witness had identified him as the man who had sexual relations with Jesse, Stephen changed his story. He admitted to having intimate contact with the student at least 6 times, 3 of them while on duty. However, he refused to be involved in the events that led to Jesse's death. According to his story, on the night Jesse was attacked, he drank a few beers with several colleagues and then went home. Stephen's account seemed corroborated by his colleagues and his wife. To verify what the officer said, Elizabeth was also interrogated. She reported that at the time when the events were supposed to occur, she was preparing a drink for the baby, who had woken up early in the morning, and at that moment, her husband arrived home. She stated that he was in a completely normal condition and that his clothes were neither tidy nor stained. Meanwhile, the inquiries continued on campus in search of other witnesses. Jesse's neighbor said he had heard him fighting with someone the night before the discovery of his body but admitted that he was intoxicated and could not specify the time or identify the voices. The news of what happened was the talk of the police station, and several agents mentioned that Stephen usually carried a sharp-toothed instrument with him. However, the officer and his wife denied that he had that. To rule out or confirm this version, the investigators obtained a search warrant for the officer's home, but no cutting blade or any incriminating evidence was found. Meanwhile, the investigators were waiting for the autopsy report as well as the results of the samples taken from Jesse's body. To cover all angles, they took DNA samples from Stephen, who was absolutely uncomfortable with the situation, and it was just the beginning. As a consequence of being considered the main suspect in a homicide case, Stephen was suspended from his duties. A few days later, he called his superior and informed him that he had bought a shotgun and threatened to take his own life. The police's immediate action to protect him from himself was to detain him and put him in a mental health center, but he escaped from there and climbed to the top of a parking lot, threatening again to end his life by jumping. Fortunately, his law-abiding colleagues managed to talk him down, after which they sent him back to the mental health center. His attempts to take his own life made him seem more guilty to the authorities, but Stephen stated that his actions were related to the fact that he had been exposed as homosexual and adulterous. When the results of the autopsy and other tests carried out on Jesse's body finally arrived, things got worse for Stephen. It was corroborated that the agent's DNA was found under the deceased young man's nails. This could have resulted from sexual relations between the two. However, Stephen had previously stated that he had not seen Jesse in 6 days. It was known that the young man showered regularly and washed his hands frequently, which reduced the possibility that the DNA came from an older intimate encounter. Other significant evidence was revealed by the autopsy. Jesse was found lying face up on the grass, and due to the type of wound on his neck, the blood flowed into the grass and was deposited under the corpse. This caused his chest to be free of those fluids. According to the forensic doctor, the student was suffocated to the point of losing consciousness, and when he fell to the ground, he was attacked with the weapon on his clean-shaven chest. The forensic doctor collected some hair, and again, Stephen's DNA matched the evidence. The forensic doctor also found bruises on Jesse's chest and back. When evaluating the possible causes, the police agreed that the marks matched a specialized choking technique used by police officers, but in this case, it was executed poorly. That detail also led directly to Stephen because, during his training, he did not excel in defensive techniques. This would explain the poor execution of the chokehold and the presence of hair from Stephen's arm on Jesse's chest as he defended himself, trying to escape and fighting for his life. With all this evidence against him, Stephen was arrested and charged with the fatal attack on the university student. Stephen was charged with first-degree murder and went to trial. Various inculpatory pieces of evidence were presented in court, including that he left the police station at 4:45 in the morning but arrived home around 5:30, according to his wife's statement. The prosecution's theory about what happened was presented during the hearing. According to them, Stephen went to Jesse's apartment that night to have sex, but the young man did not agree and confronted him for being married and possibly for his false promise to erase the charges against him from the night of the party. Several emails sent by Jesse to a friend expressed his frustration with the officer and stated that he was going to confront him. The public prosecutor's office also presented the DNA evidence and a notable detail of Stephen's hair found on Jesse's chest, which were intact at the root, indicating they were pulled by force during Jesse's struggle to free himself. The prosecution alleged that when confronted by Jesse, Stephen applied a chokehold to prevent him from breathing. Although Jesse tried to free himself, he was subdued. When Jesse was lying on the floor, Stephen made a deep cut in his neck with the serrated weapon he allegedly carried, according to statements from his fellow officers. In response, the defense addressed all the prosecution's claims. They began by noting that Stephen's DNA was not the only one found under Jesse's nails. There were also samples that corresponded to Ed McDevitt, one of Jesse's occasional partners at the university. In fact, on the fatal night, Jesse and Ed had several phone conversations, which were verified by the records requested by the investigators. However, Ed had been ruled out by the police as a person of interest in the case. Elizabeth, Stephen's wife, appeared as a valuable witness for the defense. With surprising confidence, she stated that she believed in her husband's innocence. She insisted that Stephen was neither upset nor nervous at dawn and that his uniform had no red or brown stains that could indicate the presence of blood. She stated that the prosecution's story made no sense and highlighted that the search of their home and the inspection of her husband's vehicle did not find any evidence of a crime. Another detail that the defense team emphasized was that Stephen never went to Jesse's house late at night since they usually met during his shifts. There was also no evidence of text messages or phone calls between the two during the week in which the death occurred. However, the prosecution insisted on the guilt of the police officer, and the testimonies of Jesse's friends supported that hypothesis. The young people indicated that what existed between them was more than a consensual relationship. It was a dynamic of extortion based on the power that Stephen exercised over Jesse. The jury declared Stephen Rios guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced him to life without the possibility of parole. After the verdict, Linda, Jesse's mother, said she was relieved that her son had finally achieved justice. The defense of the police officer announced that they would appeal the sentence, and they were successful. 2 years later, a judge ruled that the testimony of Jesse's friends was mostly based on rumors and should not have been admissible in the first trial. As a result, Stephen's sentence was annulled, and he was granted a new trial. In the second trial held in 2008, he could not be tried for the same charge as the first, so he was accused of second-degree murder. The defense insisted that the jury not confuse adultery with homicide. The lawyers stated that while Stephen was guilty of cheating on his wife with Jesse, he had not taken the student's life. In this new judicial process, the jury was not allowed to hear the testimony about Jesse's plan to expose Stephen to the police force. They could hear the details of the DNA tests, but the defense argued that Ed's DNA, another sexual partner, was also found under Jesse's nails. After that statement, they questioned the investigators' actions because, instead of considering Ed a suspect, they had dismissed him to free their client from guilt. The defense challenged Ed's testimony. His roommate said he was with Ed that night, but the defense proved that, at the estimated time of Jesse's death, Ed was not in the bedroom. Another man with whom Jesse supposedly had a relationship, whose identity was kept confidential, was also pointed out as an alternative suspect. It was said that he had called Jesse twice that night, but he denied being sexually involved with Jesse or having taken his life. This man lived with his parents, who confirmed that he was at home sleeping. The defense called officers who testified that Stephen was drinking with them until dawn, suggesting that he did not have time to commit the crime. Elizabeth, who by the time of the second trial had already divorced Stephen, testified once again for the defense team and insisted that her son's father was innocent. The explanation given by the defense for the presence of Stephen's hair on the victim's chest was that Jesse did not change the dirty sheets after his intimate encounters and that the hair was there from the last contact between him and the officer 6 days before his death. Despite all the efforts of the accused's legal representatives to free him from guilt and cast doubt on the evidence, in December 2008, Stephen Rios was declared guilty once again. On January 16, 2009, he was sentenced to life in prison for taking Jesse Valencia's life and received an additional 23 years in prison for armed criminal action. He has the possibility of parole from 2049. Outside the court, Special Prosecutor Molly Swingle described Stephen as an arrogant sociopath and revealed several pieces of evidence against him that were declared inadmissible in the trial but that he believed the public should know. He shared these details with the media. He detailed, among other things, that Stephen had lied to Jesse about his name throughout their relationship, to the extent that Jesse told his friends he was dating an officer named Ted Anderson and even called the Columbia Police Department in search of Officer Anderson. Molly recalled that the real Officer Ted had reported that his identification plate had been stolen. He also brought to light that Stephen was fired from a job in Vaughan County for renting a storage space under the name of another officer and taking possession of an additional space without paying for it. The representative of the public ministry also said that several young people had come forward to the police after learning that the suspect in Jesse's murder was Stephen, pointing out that the same officer had offered them sex after arresting them. He clarified that while their testimonies were valuable, they were not directly related to the case. They only served to demonstrate the type of personality the officer had, but they could not be presented since the defense did not present character witnesses. One striking aspect of this case is the support Stephen received from his in-laws, John and Susan Sullivan. Since his second sentence, the former police officer and his in-laws participated in several documentaries to clear his name. They insisted that the evidence presented against him was circumstantial. Elizabeth, his ex-wife, even stated that the real reason his former colleagues in the force turned their backs on him was that they were ashamed of his homosexual relationship with the university student. From their point of view, the police decided to abandon investigations that led to other suspects and focused on incriminating Stephen. According to the latest news that emerged in 2023, Stephen was still behind bars. His son, who was only 4 months old at the time of the events, was visiting him in prison in the company of his father-in-law, John, as Susan had died in 2010. Despite what his ex-wife and in-laws say, the truth is that 24 jurors found him guilty after 2 different trials. What do you think of today's case? We would very much like to read your comments, since your opinion on the case is very important to us. Always remember to do so with the utmost respect for the victim, for the other viewers, and for us, who will be reading them. Before you leave a like and subscribe if you